Jackson Pollock represents a huge shift in painting. When Peggy Guggenheim commissioned him to paint this, Pollock was a very young artist and not particularly well known. This is the painting really that gave him a name. It's a landmark work in that he is shifting in his ideas of how to apply the paint, what kind of paint to use. It's one of the earliest all-over compositions. You know, I think it was exciting for everybody to see this shift away from figurative painting towards the abstract.
There's a whole suite of instrumentation being evolved now looking at imaging an entire work of art. So it's great when you take a tiny microscopic sample of paint. You know, we can tell so much about what's in that tiny sample, but really that could be a unique case. You know, a bit of paint 1 inch away from that could be completely different. So when you tie in the point analysis, detecting certain pigments or binders with these new techniques where you can look across the entire surface of the painting and target certain materials, we can tell, for example, with Mural, we could target the different blue pigments. We could see exactly which blue was put where across the entire surface with hyperspectral imaging, one of the techniques we use, as well as this fantastic, almost sort of fortuitous instance where a particular material that was present in the casein house paints, we couldn't detect the casein by imaging, but this component that was only in the casein house paint, it was an aluminium silicate extender. That material we could image across the whole surface, so we have a great image where we can see exactly where this house paint was used compared to the oil.
There are many stories from Peggy, who wrote several autobiographies, as well as Lee Krasner, who related stories to friends and colleagues, that once Pollock got the canvas stretched, he had this immense, vast, expansive canvas and didn't know what to paint. And so he had, you know, painter's block, if you will, didn't know what to paint. And then inspiration struck him one night and he painted the entire painting in a very short 24-hour, 36-hour period. But we were able to look more closely, of course, at the layers of paint and really show that, in fact, that couldn't have been possible.
Our colleagues had already disproved that. I mean, made it very clear that when you look at the number of oil paint layers on this painting, and oil paint takes days, if not weeks, to dry, and you could see very clearly that a lot of the oil paint had been applied over existing dried layers, that this wasn't possible. But we did make a discovery, we think, where we actually added some truth back to that myth, which was there were 4 paints, the first 4 paints that went down. There's a bright yellow, there's a red, a brown, and a dark sort of bluey green teal color, which were all applied very dilute. They were all mixed wet and wet. You can see very clearly in cross sections these layers blended together, and they're across the entire surface. So we're fairly confident that there was this initial campaign, or probably entirely conceivably done in one night. There's a whole range of ways that Pollock was throwing paint at the canvas. A lot of it is brushed on. You can see where the brush strokes are. The brush would have touched the canvas. But he's starting to kind of separate brush and canvas. And even though we look very closely at a lot of the paint in this painting, which we thought might have been applied with the painting flat on the studio floor, as came later, we think that the painting was actually executed entirely vertically, leant up against his studio wall, but with different sort of ways of applying the paint, splatter. Some paint is dilute, drips down the surface. Other paint flies through the air, lands on the canvas and stays very much intact. In conservation, there are often no completely right and completely wrong answers. It's always a sort of a judgment. We make a decision, we weigh up certain things, and we wanted to kind of let the public into some of those thought processes, in particular about the shape of the canvas. So
the stretcher was made here in-house. We're very lucky here at the Getty in that we have professional carpenters. They worked with us to come up with a design that involves Alaskan cedar, which is a very light but very strong, straight-grained wood, as well as using a very light but solid support that is 2 layers of very light, thin aluminum with polyethylene in between, so that we were able to provide, in the sort of open spaces of the stretcher, we were able to put a solid material that you're not aware of from the front, so that there's no flapping, let's say, around of the canvas itself as it travels. The most rewarding part of this project undoubtedly
was the painting was installed, the gallery's looking great, and then we had a group of about 50 VIPs from Iowa who came all the way from Iowa to the opening. They were dressed up, this was a big occasion for them, and they all just went silent and they started applauding. You know, they've known this painting for 30 or 40 years, they've lived with it, they know its importance, its relevance, they're deeply proud that Iowa has this painting. And to have that sort of reaction from them, just appreciation that we'd clearly done something right.